Are you good?
Yep.
Okay. So my name is Jackie Hendry. I'm a senior at the University of South Dakota, and I'm graduating this May. Or I guess I hope I am, depending on how this project turns out. Driving relaxes me, which is good because I've done a lot of it over the last year. A lot of that has been just making trips back and forth home, but also some of the trips I've made for this project. Over this summer, I was filling up gas in town in Vermilion, and I noticed that the cashier was just like staring at my car, like with this really curious expression on her face, and finally she asked me, "What state is that license plate from?" And I was like, "Oh, it's from Illinois." And she goes, "Oh, well, what are you doing out here?" Well...
When I was 13, my folks and I went on a road trip to the Black Hills in South Dakota, and we visited Crazy Horse. That was a turning point because I was exposed to this whole side of history for the first time, and I was fascinated. Right around the time to start looking at colleges, my mom got an email newsletter from the site that mentioned the University of South Dakota. We looked at it, and it sounded so perfect to me. I was interested in video editing, and the media program looked really great, and I saw the Native Studies major online. And that kind of sealed the deal. Of course I would go to South Dakota. That's where I first learned anything substantial about Native America. It's obviously the best place to learn more. I met Mac McFarland and Leon Ledercharge in my first Native Studies class as a freshman. We came to share similar opinions about the program here.
USD's catalog and their online webpage advertised a pretty robust Native Studies program that would lead to a major, and so based on what was in the catalog and what was on the USD's Native Studies webpage, I was very interested, and I chose to come here so I could pursue that.
How did that compare with what was actually there?
Well, it was not even close to what was advertised.
What were you expecting that you didn't really find?
Well, I was expecting more about the history specific to Native American tribes, maybe in this region, but also along the whole United States. I was also more looking for emphasis on treaties, law, tribal law, government to relations with the United States government, some language, some culture from other nations throughout the 566 federally recognized tribes, some studies on unrecognized tribes, some studies on my tribe that I'm part of.
And there wasn't any of that? Like, what did you find instead?
To me, it just seemed like something I know already. I've studied on my own. So I did a lot of self-studying in the past, and I don't think it could benefit me any more than what I already knew.
The only information I really had to go off of, especially being someone out of state, was the website. And the website showed just a whole host of classes, from culture to language to modern contemporary issues and everything like that. So I'm expecting just loads of classes, never having to really worry about a class making the enrollment minimum or anything like that.
There was no synergistic approach to learning. There was no, starting with learning history and learning culture and then broadening out into today's political environment and cultural environment and what are the goals. I mean, it really is, and it has been, just a hodgepodge, a collection of classes. Take a little bit here, take a little bit there, bring it together, we'll call you Native Studies, have a good day.
David Estes was recruited to the program by Dr. Elizabeth Castle.
Talking with Dr. Castle my senior year, she told me that she was, at the time, the only one of two Native Studies professors, her and Dr. Valandra, but Dr. Valandra was teaching the higher level classes. And so at the time, I figured for the first 2 years, I'd be mainly taking classes with Dr. Castle. So in a sense, I did expect just to be mainly working with one or two professors, but I was a little let down to learn that there were only so many classes offered. Like my freshman year, they had a class on Native law, and treaty rights, but it was an upper level class, it was a 490 something class. And when I got older, I wanted to take that class, but nobody was offering it.
Right now, if you're a Native Studies major, you take whatever is offered because there isn't enough really to pick and choose from.
It was the faculty member, against the chair, and the faculty member against the administration to try and get the administration to work with it, and it's just there was no working together. It was definitely, how is the department going to thrive when it's not being supported through the university?
As a sophomore, I wrote a column in our student newspaper that outlined my frustration with the declining department. I began receiving emails of support from former students and faculty almost immediately, and I even got a phone call from one of the founders of the Native Studies discipline, Dr. Elizabeth Cook-Lynn. The column was even picked up by Indians.com, inspired a full report by the Volant, and an article in the Argus Leader. I wrote that column out of naive frustration. I had no clue of the long history of problems I was about to uncover. American Indian Studies, as it was first known, has existed in some way at USD for decades, but it didn't become a department until 2005. The department's first chair was Dr. Mark Daniels, a psychology professor. He worked closely with other Native faculty and community members to make their dream of a department a reality.
We'd sat together on committees sort of talking about our vision of this program, and I understood that, from them. And I felt like I sort of carried that responsibility too. It wasn't just what I saw happening, or it wasn't just what Dean Moen wanted to happen, but it was also the vision of people who'd been invested in this program for a long, long, long time. Well, it was kind of exciting. Like all of a sudden we're going to be called the Department of American Indian Studies, and just this sort of sense of validity and legitimacy to the program that was added by having just that simple name added to it and that status. It was interesting though, because I had already known this. One of the things was that we were placed in the basement of the Dakota Hall, and it's an old building, so it looks like a basement. It's got pipes. The ceilings aren't finished. The pipes are running through the halls, and so despite on one hand sort of being valued as a program and getting a name as a department, on the other hand, it still often felt like we were sort of the unwanted stepchild or something that was in the basement.
The first hire in the new department was Dr. Elizabeth Castle, a historian with a passion for oral history.
I had some pretty strong opinions about current Native Studies programs and departments, and so this was a chance for me to come to South Dakota, where I had an existing community of Native community practitioners, grandmothers, individuals who had, respect, who had asked me also to come and apply for this job.
Things looked bright at first, but that would change. Dr. Daniels told me what happened less than 2 years after he became chair.
Kurt Hackemer, who was the assistant dean, sort of one of two who worked right underneath Matt Moen, came over to my office, and he said, Mark, he had a carbon copy, a photocopy. He gave me a letter. He said, this is going to come to you in 30 minutes, and I just want you to see it before it gets here. And it was a letter that told me that I had been relieved of my responsibilities as a chair. I was still a professor in the program, but I was no longer to hold the leadership of the program.
I know that there were management issues there. There were difficulties with folks getting along, and that was my understanding why I was asked to go in.
And so I've wrestled with that. I mean, it was something that was really hard for me for 6 or 8 months, and in the end I chose to leave the department because of that reason. So I stayed on until the end of that academic year, and it was just too dysfunctional for me.
This was just the beginning of a 7-year pattern of inconsistency in the Native Studies department.
I've never found anybody who can relate to the idea of what it was like to have a department founded, to have 6 chairs of the department in 7 years. 4 of those chairs being people who were simply not in Native Studies at all, but basically what they call in receivership. They were just simply put as a figurehead in charge of the department.
In 2008, Dr. Edward Valandra was hired as the newest chair. With a research interest in the Native Studies discipline itself, he immediately set out to reinvent the curriculum.
Before I came on, this was a program that was put together like English had a Native American literature course. Well, they cross-listed that with the department. And so they did things like that. If they had an American history course, they cross-listed that with that. But those programs were owned by other departments: history, English, if you will, psychology, sociology, anthropology. They own those. They were just cross-listing. And so that's not really an academic program or anything like that. One could say, it's a cost-effective measure to do that, but really, if you want your own identity, and if you're an academic department, essentially you have academic autonomy. So a department really needs to set some intellectual boundaries and take its place within the other academic units.
Dr. Valandra began developing a new departmental model for the curriculum. He also hoped to globalize it by changing it from American Indian Studies to Native Studies. As those changes progressed, students in one of Dr. Castle's classes produced a film that challenged the department's position on campus. Its title referenced the university's slogan at the time, "Everybody belongs, out of the basement."
And everything was in this film. Like, we looked at the different cohorts of Native students that had been there, what the persistence rate was, how did this relate to the development of the Native Studies department, and also our location and the kind of environment that we were doing work in.
The project's main concern was the environmental hazards in Dakota Hall. The students found it was harmful not just to the multi-million-dollar oral history collection, but to their own health as well.
And we did research on what came back, and it's like, these are major allergens. Like, these could kill people if they came down there and they had serious allergies to things like mold.
Yes, a lot of people, we can argue about certain molds, but the bottom line is that I had students who came to see me who had to go to the hospital afterwards. It wasn't just a bunch of like rabble-rousing kids. It was something, students really wanted to be heard and they wanted changes to happen.
Some administrators called the students' claims inaccurate, but less than a year after the film was presented, classes weren't in the basement of Dakota Hall anymore. With Dr. Valandra's new curriculum approved by the Board of Regents, it seemed again like Native Studies was gaining momentum. In 2011, Dr. Armik Mirzayan was hired as the new Lakota language professor. It didn't take long for him to notice the trouble brewing within the department.
The whole Native Studies department question has been one of the biggest challenges since I've been here. That's been there since day one. In fact, the day before I arrived here, I noticed there were difficulties and things that were going on that I hadn't noticed before when I visited and when I talked to people.
Those internal problems eventually led to a legal complaint. That prompted USD to conduct its own investigation.
It was contentious enough that the university brought in outside counsel to conduct an investigation, which is unusual. They set up shop in the conference room in the library, and basically anyone who had had any contact with the Native Studies program, students, faculty, staff, administrators, was brought in and was interviewed by this lawyer in the library. So I was one of the people who was brought in, but there was a laundry list of people that way.
I've managed to learn quite a lot about those proceedings and how both sides of the situation feel the matter was mishandled. But because of the legal implications, the most I can really share is that the investigation ruled the various claims of workplace hostility to be unfounded. Still, the process left Dr. Valandra questioning USD's commitment to the department's success.
So then when I resigned, I did it because I thought ultimately the university really didn't want what I was hired to do,
It seems to me there was always some sort of dysfunction in the program. But one thing that everyone seemed to agree on was a disappointment with the administration.
What I don't see happening with that is someone who's higher up who says this is what we want to make our flagship of the USD. When someone does that, when Abbott does it or Moen does it or someone like that, and they say we're going to make that happen. But I think there's a lot of hesitancy to do that because of the dysfunction that's been there.
So if there was turmoil and politics from the narratives that you probably hear down there, it usually came from the administration because they were letting this stuff go.
It's that classic experience where, we're going to own you when things are going well, and we're going to claim you as ours. But when things are challenging, we're going to step back and go, oh, this is not our business. We shouldn't be involving ourselves in this. When you created, through your direct action or inaction, that very circumstance.
I knew I had to talk to someone higher up. Native Studies is housed in the College of Arts and Sciences, which has been led by Dean Matt Moen since 2002. Because he legally can't discuss personnel issues, he refused an on-camera interview. But Dean Moen really kindly invited me to meet with him to discuss my personal experiences with the program. I was then able to convince him to answer some questions over email. I asked how he'd respond to calls for the administration to lay out a vision for Native Studies. He said, "The success of an academic department is driven by the quality and the actions of its faculty. The faculty recruit and mentor students, determine the curriculum content and teach the courses, facilitate student progression through advising, and serve as professional role models. The vision for Native Studies has always been that its faculty will succeed in the classic tripartite mission of the university, serving as excellent teachers, doing cutting-edge research in their discipline, and being dedicated public servants, with an eye toward promoting inclusive excellence." When I asked him what he thought was most important for critics of the administration to understand, he said, "When I arrived as dean, Native Studies consisted of one faculty member with a PhD housed in the Department of History, a Lakota language instructor with an MA, and a program assistant. Native Studies now consists of 3 PhD faculty housed in history, anthropology, and modern languages and linguistics." He went on to say, "The program's struggles in past years came from conflict among faculty in the program and from the unit's decision to narrow the curriculum from its more interdisciplinary roots, which caused student enrollment to fall. We're in the process of fixing those problems." I also talked with former Provost Chuck Staben just before he left to become president of the University of Idaho in early 2014.
Well, the university, so we've made a couple of different sorts of commitments. There's some history here. So the university, of course, committed to hiring Dr. Valandra about the time I came to the university, and we had Dr. Castle at that point. And yet they were unable, it seemed, to really grow the enrollment and attract students. And then I think that the university really didn't reduce its commitment per se, but Dr. Valandra left, Dr. Castle left, and now the university is taking a somewhat different approach, not necessarily reducing our commitment level. And I think that different approach has not yet really attracted students. So I'm actually hopeful that the enrollment will increase.
This didn't sit well with me. How can they say the departmental model didn't attract students when that's exactly what drew me to USD? Of course, my classes were always small, and when I looked at the university's official enrollment count over the last 10 years, it was obvious that Native Studies was never a powerhouse. But those numbers just didn't line up with what I heard from past professors.
We were growing our faculty lines, and actually we were getting a lot of students too. I think at one point we had at least 30 or more majors and minors.
So at various times, it was all a snapshot. But the point is, the intention of the 35 to 38 people, 35 for sure, there were 35 people who came to me and came to my classes and consistently said, "I'm a major," or "I'm planning to be a major." So to me, those were the numbers. And also, students don't realize that they don't think, oh, if I don't go change my major today, it might be gone tomorrow.
Mistake or not, the official numbers were always low, and in fact they dropped considerably. But Dr. Valandra doesn't see this as a fault with the curriculum.
Like the provost had mentioned earlier, he said we tried a disciplinary approach, but it didn't work. Well, no, it didn't work because the administration didn't give it time to work. And we were arguing that it could be one of the best programs in the United States at an undergraduate level. And I'm sure my leaving probably took a lot of air out of the program, or the sales of that program, because I really worked hard on getting it to where it was. It was the whole curriculum, the whole program was approved by the Board of Regents. We are set to launch it in the fall of 2011. And 2 weeks before classes are going to start, I'm done.
Dr. Valandra resigned just before the start of my first semester. By my junior year, Dr. Castle had resigned as well, leaving me one of 5 majors in a department with no faculty. And it was time for me to pick a thesis project. It just so happened that a few weeks after I submitted my proposal for this project, the hiring process began. Students were invited to meet each finalist. There would be a lunch at the Native American Cultural Center, a teaching demonstration, and a research presentation. The candidates came from all sorts of disciplines: environmental studies, history, creative writing, political science. The search even went beyond the original 4 finalists. I saw all but 1 or 2 and got a bit of a reputation for showing up with a cart full of camera equipment. I also tended to be one of the only students at the demonstrations after a while. It wasn't because other students didn't care about the process. I knew they did. And I knew the search committee wanted more students there because I was asked to try to bring more people with me. But as dismal as the attendance tended to be, I had a pretty good idea as to why.
They were open. I wasn't able to go. When they had them, every time they had them, I was in class. So for me, that was, I know they invited us. I'm not sure if I'm not sure if our voice would have meant that much. I don't know. Certainly when the department was dismantled and all those decisions about how Native Studies was going to rise up from the ashes of what used to be a department, I don't know, but we weren't sought out.
Sometime in the spring of 2013, there was a meeting to discuss that very issue that was closed to students. But that didn't stop Betsy Horton. She wanted to hear the plan for herself.
It was interesting because they said that they had the funding and that they had the interest and that they wanted to have a good program, but they just don't have the amount of students that they need. So that was a good answer to a question, and it was more succinct than anything else that I had heard.
But the return of cross-listed classes frustrated some.
It's a lazy way to approach Native Studies. You kick the can to other, you just simply look at departments and say, hey, come up with a couple different, Native Studies courses. You don't have anybody taking a student as a freshman and guiding them through a process that gets them at the end with a specific set of skill sets.
My thoughts on that, it goes back to, I think it was probably the first or second Native Studies class that I took when we talk about, Native Studies or Indigenous Studies and how it looks within a university setting. The interdisciplinary model that USD has now gone to, it was framed as one of the lowest models there is.
I talked with Mac and Jordan not long after the new faculty members were hired, Dr. Elise Boxer with a joint appointment in history, and Dr. David Posthumus in anthropology. By the fall semester of 2014, they and Dr. Kurt Hackemer were already in the process of changing the program, and they were well aware of the skepticism.
The important question was how to come up with a curriculum that reflects the faculty resources that we have, which might be different than the ideal program that we'd like to have.
The reason why we're approaching this from an interdisciplinary perspective right now is because, again, our program is so small. There's 2 of us, and we're not even full-time appointment in Native Studies.
Again, we have these faculty members here who are very good, who know a lot, who are really supportive of the program, who want to be involved, and we need to use their strengths, because Dr. Boxer and I right now, anyways, we can't teach all the classes that we need to offer for this to be a robust program.
So colleagues of mine like Gary Cheeseman, Dr. Beth Boyd, Dr. Natanya Pooley. They're all individuals who are familiar with the field of Native Studies, but they approach it from a very specific discipline, whether it's psychology, English, or education. But what that does is it gives our students an opportunity to benefit from the expertise of other professors and also benefit from their type of worldview and methodology, which is oftentimes discipline specific.
I brought up Max and my own concern about a lack of accountability or consistency between the cross-listed classes.
Well, that's why we've been closely monitoring the syllabi. That, you know, we have a policy where we have to see the syllabus before we're going to say we can cross-list this class.
The old program was a catch-all for, it was just a list of courses, no particular order, just take all this stuff. It was too disorganized. The program that currently exists might be too tightly structured, but what it did was it introduced an introductory course, a methods course, capstone course. All of those are being carried forward into the new curriculum. And the idea is you can sustain a program if you have a relatively small number of Native Studies majors, and then their classes are supplemented by people who are taking the course as a history course or an English course or an education course or a religious studies course.
So a lot of it's just kind of like cleanup and kind of like righting the ship a little bit in these early phases. But there's just so many strengths here that are already in place. The Lakota language courses, the relationship with the W.H. Overy Museum, the South Dakota Oral History Center, all these strengths that we want to build on that are already in place. You know, so it's kind of like a revamp, but it's also kind of like getting back to our roots here at USD in a way.
As a scholar or as a professor, right, it's not just about teaching those classes, but attracting students to that. So I try to do, both me and my colleague do outreach, get involved with the Native Center, with Gene Thin Elk, and any initiatives that he's doing just to show that we're supportive, to be involved within the Native student community on campus. But those are ways that we can, I think, initially reach out. But I do believe, with the building of a program, it realistically is going to take time.
But time was running out for me. A year and a half into this project, I was falling farther and farther behind. Journalists are supposed to be objective. I was doing my best to approach things that way, but the truth is, this was always going to be very personal.
I mean, there comes a point when everyone has to grow up a little bit, I think, and realize that some things aren't always what they seem, and I can understand that. And there's a lot of different factors that are at play, especially as far as my disappointment in general with the Native Studies program at USD. Since I started college, both my grandparents have died, my mom's gotten sick, and a lot of things have happened at home, and I've been far away. And that was going to be difficult no matter what, but it's even more difficult when I think that if I had known some things beforehand, I might have made a different decision. And that's a hard thing to reconcile myself with sometimes. That's a hard thing to kind of come to terms with.
I ended up pushing my graduation date back. I needed the time to work on some personal issues, and I wanted to get this as right as I could. It's worth mentioning that this isn't the whole story of Native Studies at USD, and that's because it can't be. I can't report information I don't have, whether that's for legal reasons or otherwise. As a student who's still learning, I have a lot of resources, but I also have a lot of limitations. It might frustrate some that I'm not sharing everything I've heard, and it might allow others to discredit this project entirely. Those people have their reasons. But this is the story as best as I've been able to understand it, based on the sources available to me. And despite all of the problems, I've kept on with it because, after a while, it seemed like everywhere I look, I see a reason Native Studies is important.
Education's a perfect vehicle to combat racism. Education's a perfect vehicle to combat prejudice between non-Native, Native communities. Because prejudice, racism is not a one-way street, it's a two-way street.
And I think it's important to have Native Studies because USD has, part of their mission statement for inclusive excellence is a commitment to Native nations and people, and I think Native Studies can do that.
As you might expect, anyone who's been involved with Native Studies over the last few years is skeptical of the university's inclusive rhetoric.
I mean, for gosh sakes, 10% of South Dakota's population is Native American. What is the percentage at USD? It ain't 10%. And so how are you inviting and encouraging Native students to come to this university? What kind of an environment are you creating?
And this happens, in every major institution where you go into a space and, every little building or statue or thing that you see reminds you that you're in a colonized space, that this history is wiping out and replacing another history.
I recognize the challenge for so many of our Native students to come to USD, and it felt like they were stepping on Mars. And so I really wanted to create a place where Native students could come and feel at home. That was probably my biggest goal, was that. And they could feel valued. They could feel like this is a place, here's an academic program on campus, an institute and an oral history center that value who I am and that value the people I come from.
There's so much that can be taught throughout the courses, and that would be beneficial to students who want to learn, non-Native students too, because it would be nice to see our future generations understand each other more.
And that desire is spreading. In 2013, South Dakota State University expanded their American Indian Studies program into a major under the leadership of Dr. Richard Myers. USD's Native Studies program invited him to speak earlier this year, and I asked him how he responded to skepticism about SDSU's program.
Like a lot of things, you can make the conversation an immediate battle versus an understanding. My response to people who are immediately on the offensive to kind of denigrate something that they don't understand is simply, oh yeah, I know what you mean, I agree with them. And I say, so what would you do? What did you do? And then you find out, that's when it starts to reveal a lot of things about where that question is coming from and why.
I talked to a few different administrators and, but the overall, I even had one tell me, well, Native Studies isn't really a standalone discipline. It's more like it should be just a minor, like you take it as a minor, to something else.
So this discipline is evolving, and with that evolution comes, what is Native Studies all about? How is it different from, let's say, ethnic studies or history or anthropology? So what makes it unique? And part of that uniqueness, of course, is how we define it, particularly from a Native perspective.
Who wants to know about dinosaur poop or beetles that do this or that, an entomologist? So the question, it's interesting because it's an immediately a sumptuous notion that ethnic people, ethnic studies, and those aren't needed. It puts people right on the bat in the defensive, which is, what are you going to do with an AIS degree? What are you going to do with a women's studies or an English lit? Or you can go on to be a lawyer, you could be a historian, you could be a teacher, you could be a federal government worker. You could do anything that anybody else does. But why is it they've racially targeted you? It's an interesting question.
If you're wondering how SDSU's program is faring compared to USD's, it's a little too soon to tell.
Like all of research, if you don't have at least 3 years under you, it doesn't count anyways. So for policy reasons, you need at least 3 years before you can start to do measurements of something before it takes kind of the growth that it needs. It has to have the bite, the roots have to be grown. So it's still growing roots.
And in a way, so are we. So far, Dr. Boxer and Dr. Posthumus have made good on their outreach efforts, from interviews with the Volant to research presentations. I caught up with Mac at a research forum we both went to last fall.
Have you had anything to do with the 2 new faculty hires?
No, I didn't. But I'm very impressed, and I think this is the right direction. We actually have needed more of these kind of events within Native Studies. Yeah, I found it very interesting, very well done, and a nice addition to Native Studies within USD.
But those who faulted the administration for Native Studies difficulties aren't so sure that enough has changed.
USD is still sitting on the greatest, gold mine of opportunity that, until it gets out of its own way, it's never going to achieve. And I I don't know if it's going to take a few people with courage or it's just going to take over time, another, student movement, because usually that's what it takes to change institutions.
To me, it kind of seems, like we're backtracking a lot. But I know that, I realize that in order to build something up, you kind of have to go back sometimes and start building those connections and everything with other departments.
So the university, by hiring these 2 faculty members, have bought themselves about 5 to 7 years of calm. The discipline of Native Studies is approaching its 50th year now. And I think this paper, this project that you're working on, may help in a more reflective sense, because I think when 50 years of Native study rolls around, a lot of Native study programs are going to be asking those kind of questions like, we've been in business for 50 years. Are Native people better off? Are Native communities better off? Are the disparities that we experience, are they diminishing?
We just want to let people know that it's back and we're gonna be steering the ship. I was on the phone with my dad the other day and I was telling him how, every few days I'll be walking on campus and I'll just get this big grin, this dumb smile on my face, like, I can't believe that this happened and this worked out. And he said, yeah, I think you're right. I think you got your dream job. So I'm just like, I'm so happy to be here.
I love what I do. I love teaching. I love meeting students, and I hope that in some way I impact their way of understanding the world around them. And like I tell my student, there is not a black and white way about thinking about the past. I don't think Indian people, we are victims, but I do think that, U.S. colonization has had a dramatic effect on Indian peoples, and that we continue to live with those policies even today. But just like Native Studies, our people are resilient. And that's what I hope our program here at USD will be, is a very resilient program that will continue to grow. And hopefully students will see in the next 3 to 5 years that it's a viable major, but an important major for them as well.
I don't know what happens from here, but I know what I hope happens. I hope that if people see this documentary, they learn something. I hope they learn why Native Studies is important. I hope they learn why it matters that we failed and why it could only benefit us to succeed. And I hope people keep learning. This place, these people, and these classes changed my life. And if anything, they make me want to keep fighting for these voices to be heard. Years ago, I wrote a column thinking no one would read it, and it went across the country. I hope the university knows that a lot of people care, and a lot of people are watching. In a few years, will the next person who wants to learn come to the University of South Dakota and find what they were looking for? I sure hope so.